Welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Zandi. I'm the chief economist of Moody's Analytics, and I'm joined, as per usual, by Ryan Sweet, director of real-time economics. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing well. How's your week, Mark?
Went fast, Ryan. I was in Milwaukee for a couple of days for a board meeting. Made it there and back. Pretty quiet in Milwaukee too, I'd have to say. But that was a good week. Where's the cowbells, Ryan?
They're right over there. Can you see them?
No, you need to pull those out.
Give me a second.
I could see cowbell. Yeah.
Do you see the cowbells? So
I did, yes.
So if you get, by the way, listener, Kevin's jumping the gun here, but we got Kevin Hassett here today as a guest. We're going to introduce him formally in just a minute, but we're really honored to have him with us. So welcome, Kevin, and I'm gonna grill you in just a minute. So hang on.
Sure.
But these cowbells are key, Kevin, because we play this game here on Inside Economics with the statistics, and if Mark gets it right, do we ring the cowbells?
Okay.
If Ryan gets it right, I mean, what's the big deal? He knows all the statistics.
He's supposed to know this stuff.
He's supposed to know this stuff, exactly. Yeah,
I didn't know you were going to be in the office. I would have dropped them off.
Yeah, and I came in because I wanted to be with Cris. Cris, where are you? You're back at home? Is that where you are?
Yeah, the fourth floor is actually closed in the office today. So
it is. I didn't know that.
They're doing some repair work. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I had to come in because we're doing major surgery on my electrical system in my house. So I have no power in the house, no internet, no nothing. So I made it my way to the office. And that's Cris Dorides. You heard Chris's voice. He's the deputy chief economist, and looks like you're in fine form, Cris. I'm the one who's wearing the geeky shirt today. Cris is looks like James Bond,
Little role reversal today. So
yeah, a little role reversal. Yeah, well, good. Well, welcome, Cris. And Kevin, so good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Here. Great. Yeah, I think you and I almost have the same geeky shirt on, actually.
I know we're two geeky guys on this. I am a geeky guy, so there's no way around it. So
True.
That's what it is. And where are you joining us from, Kevin? Are you from in DC?
Oh, I'm just in my kitchen. Yeah, you see my wife has our kitchen filled with her chicken and rooster collection. And so given the supply chain disruption, we might end up having to eat that guy back there.
So when you're on TV,
but yeah, I'm in my kitchen in DC.
When you're on TV, do you do it from that venue, or do you go somewhere else?
Lately they've been sending trucks to the house. Like you could be a little far away from the city, but here in DC, like if you see me on TV the last month, I would have been in a van. But I have different parts of the house that are set up better for shots than the kitchen. But the kitchen is where all the work gets done right now. It is actually a supply chain story too, because we did a little renovation because we're an empty nest now, and I bought some new office furniture like last February, and it's still not here.
Oh, is that right?
February. And so I'm literally like working at the kitchen table most of the time because I don't have a desk.
Oh my goodness, that is a supply chain problem. I wonder what part of the world that's coming from. Yeah,
New York State.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Can't get the trucker. Yeah. Yeah. Are you familiar with Room Rater? Have you seen this?
Oh yeah, I don't think I've been embarrassed by
not
Room
rated.
Yeah.
I have a home in Vero, and I did some interviews down there. They love that venue. They hate my home, and I wonder what they would rate this. This is my office. By the way, that's my mom's. For all the YouTubers out there, that's my mom did the big wreath back there. So she's a little bit of an artist.
So it's your mom made the wreath. The wreath isn't your mom. That's for a minute. You said that's my mom.
Yeah, that would be scary.
That would be a little odd. Yeah.
That would be right. Right. Well, Kevin, so good to have you. We've been friends for a long time. I can't even remember, when we first met. But
it would have been the late '90s.
Yeah, and you've had such a great career, still doing lots of different things. You were at AEI for a while. You were director of economic research and studies there, and you'd have this great meeting every year where you'd get
first at Beaver Creek and then at Sea Island.
Yeah, you'd get some D's, some R's, a lot of Republicans in the Senate and the House, and it was great several days of policy and politics, and just a really fun time.
Yeah.
And you invited me to a number of those functions, and I really
Yeah, you
appreciate
did
that.
well.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did my best to, kind of take it right up to the line, but not go too far, with the D stuff. So I thought it was pretty good. And then you were on the Council of Economic Advisors. You're the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Trump. Tell us a little bit about that. Can you, or how was
Sure.
that?
Well, it's actually kind of interesting, like how I got drawn into that. One of the things, because you and I actually worked on the McCain campaign together long ago.
Oh, that's where we
That's
really
right.
got to know each other, right? Yeah.
I think we had met before then.
Yeah.
But basically, one of the things that really bugged me about economic policy making in the U.S. is that there are a few places with these sort of black box scoring models. And I know you guys actually are one of those places now. But that if you don't have a black box, then developing policy, you're really at an extreme disadvantage. And back when you were helping us with the McCain campaign, like the Bush guys had hired every single person that would model anything. Right, in 2000. I don't know if you helped us in 2000. It might be you came for '08. I don't know if you were
It was
there in
08.
2000.
It was '08, not
But
2000. Yeah.
but if the candidate wants to propose something, then the numbers kind of got to add up. But if you don't have a big model, then how are you going to make a proposal where the numbers add up? And then when the numbers don't add up, then the media just beats the crap out of you. So anyway, so what I did is I reverse engineered. You know about this? I reverse engineered the Joint Tax Committee and CBO, creating this website called the Open Source Policy Center. And the basic idea was to make it so that anybody, anyone listening right now, could come up with their own tax plan and then get like the distribution tables and the revenue costs and you could dynamic score if you want. There are a lot of different models merged to it and so on. And so the idea was to democratize policy debate and make it so Democrats, Republicans, independents, anybody who wants to could formulate a plan and sort of know what the official score would look like, really almost instantly. And so I built that website, and pretty much every presidential campaign in the last cycle was using it to some extent. And also, we could sort of see that a lot of people in government are using it. Even a lot of people at Joint Tax Committee use our software now because it's easier to use than their software. Kevin Brady at Ways and Means started. He had all of his staff trained up on scoring things with the Open Source Policy Center. And then when Joint Tax disagreed with the score, then he would ask them to explain why, and sort of kind of opened up the black box a little bit over time. But what happened was that you might recall that in the campaign, the Trump administration had some proposals where the numbers were just like totally out of line.
Yeah.
And they had like the classic, it's happened to lots of campaigns, a lot of news stories about how they don't have a clue about what they're doing, that kind of stuff. And so just a friend of Jared Kushner's, who knows me, said, oh, well, you should get someone connected to the Open Source Policy Center and use that thing, and then your numbers will be fine. And so they called me up, and then I actually knew a guy. Turns out the Joint Economic Committee had just changed chairs, and a bunch of the career staffers at the Joint Economic Committee got let go, including a guy named Jeff Schlagenoff. You probably know Jeff, because he's right in the middle of they're like the economic think tank for Congress. And so I told the Trump campaign, hire Schlagenoff. He knows how to run OSPC, and your numbers will be fine. And so then from then on, basically they didn't, they could certainly got in a lot of trouble for a lot of other things. But, if they said something was three, if they said something was three, it was three. And so then after the president won, he's kind of like, oh, that guy that fixed our numbers, he should be CEA chair.
That is great.
But I didn't even work for the campaign or anything. I literally was just running this website for all the campaigns. But then I might even talk to you about it, that I thought that at some point, serving your country, it's a real honor. And
absolutely.
I probably wouldn't get another opportunity to. And so I decided, even though I didn't come in as, like, you might recall that when they nominated me, I was being attacked at Breitbart, and Lou Dobbs has said that, Trump has double-crossed his voters by picking Hassett.
I didn't catch that. Oh,
yeah. Well, anyway, so I wasn't necessarily a natural fit, but I loved it. Ended up being close friends with the president, and I hope you get to serve in the White House someday soon.
You're very kind. Well, thank goodness that you did. I mean, really, with all your talent and skill, the nation really needed your help, and it's just good of you to serve. So thank you for all that. And then you left, and then you came back, and you were a special. I think the right
Senior advisor. It's actually
Senior
like about
advisor.
the highest title you can
Yeah.
have in the White House. And the interesting thing is because like the Council of Economic Advisors is spelled with an E, advisors. But if you're a senior advisor, then it's an OR at the end. And so I think I might be the only person in U.S. history to have both been an advisor and an advisor in the White House. It's probably true, right? I mean, it's
Probably, yeah.
a very unique status. But seriously, the early in January already, it was like clear to me that the COVID thing was going to be a big deal. You would have seen me on CNN talking about how bad the pandemic was going to be and how GDP already in January, my GDP estimate for second quarter was minus 30 something percent. I could run you through the math that got us there. You and I probably even talked about it at the time. But, I think that when it became clear that that was true, and then the president sort of knew me well and trusted me, the task force had basically no data operation. And so like the first time I went to a task force meeting, Dr. Birx, who's a wonderful person, I love her. And I think that she kind of got, some bad things. She got the short shrift at the end of that. I think she was a really American hero, but she was literally making charts with a pencil, and then, so my main job was one to help design the stimulus stuff. But two, to help like create a data operation for the task force so that they could actually keep track of things. And so as an example, while I was there, our team, all of a sudden I'm sitting in my office and somebody says, "Oh, Cuomo is on the line." And, at that point, New York was really, really in bad shape. And they said that he needs us to send him 40,000 ventilators. And we only had 10,000 ventilators in the stockpile. And so like, how am I going to send them 40,000 ventilators? And so then I got the idea that the Medicare billing data, because I'm in the White House, so I can sort of get access to just about every data you need with a stroke of the presidential pen. I got the Medicare billing data, which is for every hospital in the country, 3 times a day. They actually pay them 3 times a day. Really? And it says basically, so that first thing I did is I looked at like, what's the maximum number of ventilators ever billed in a day? And then I looked, well, how many did they bill yesterday? And so then I could find like the empty ventilators. And so then we could actually call up hospitals and send FEMA people like to move ventilators from places that had low capacity to places. And ventilators are basically what you need to have an ICU bed. But then when we called the hospitals, they would sort of say, hey, well, yeah, but maybe we're going to need that ventilator 3 weeks from now. This is a pandemic. So why should I lend it to New York? And so actually Everett Eisenstadt worked with me at the National Economic Council and was the head of the DC office for General Motors. And so I called up Everett and I said, air filters, ventilators, maybe you guys could make ventilators, right? And so he talked to the General Motors people, and they actually really quickly started making ventilators. Like they're an incredible industrial company. And that made the whole thing work, because then you could sort of call up a hospital down the road and say, hey, lend some ventilators to New York. And by the time you might need yours back, if we don't give it to you back, we'll get one from GM and give it to you. And so like in the middle of a crisis, there were just a million things like that really required data analysis and economics and so on. And that was what I did when I went back into my second trip to the White House. But it was pretty weird because I was on TV a lot, and as like I always just answer questions truthfully. Like this White House is pretty disciplined with their talking points. Like everybody goes on TV says it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated, which is completely not true. Just look at what's going on in the UK right now. But everybody says those talking points. But I was out there basically just answering questions truthfully throughout the COVID crisis. And it's amazing, sort of how treacherous the press can be when you're doing that. One time there was an outbreak in the White House, and a number of people got COVID really early on.
I remember that, yeah.
And we're basically the West Wing is pretty fortified. You can't open the windows, right? There's no ventilation, and you're basically working in close quarters, doing things like getting ventilators to people so they don't die. And like all around me, there are people getting COVID. And as you know, I've had like heart troubles and stuff like that. And so I'm probably like the guy who, if he died of COVID, then everybody would say, well, of course he died. He's one of those pre-existing condition guys. But yeah, I'm going into the West Wing every day anyway, because we got to serve our country. And at one point, when I think CNN, somebody said, well, what's it like to be in the White House right now? And then I just sort of said, well, yeah, it is scary. There are people getting COVID, but you go to work every day because you got to serve your country. And there are a lot of people, there are a lot of people in the armed services that take much bigger risks than being around COVID. But then all of a sudden, everywhere, especially the liberal media, is like, Hassett's afraid to go to the White House.
I remember that. I do remember that.
Yeah,
I do remember
but it was
that.
so it's a very weird time. I mean, like everybody decided to fight about COVID instead of work together, I think.
Well, I know I've told you this before. I'll say it again. You really ought to write a book on your experience. I mean,
Oh yeah.
you mean these stories are invaluable and highly interesting, but I think very informative for folks in the future.
I think if I did do that, it would have to have a sufficient amount of time. That it's just one of those things. It's so political still.
Yeah, true. Good point.
And like, was it the Wuhan lab? Was it not the Wuhan lab? What was Fauci saying about masks? Did Fauci lie to Congress? I was definitely in the Oval when Fauci said 100% it came from a pangolin to the president. I was in the Oval with Fauci and the president when Fauci told the president, for the love of God, don't tell people to wear masks. That's almost a direct quote, because and then he actually said, if people put a mask on, then they're going to be fiddling with the masks, and then they'll be touching their face, and that'll probably make them more likely to get the virus. He says explicitly, the president was sitting at the Resolute desk when Fauci said that to him, and then the president goes out and says that, and then a week later everybody's criticizing him for it. I mean, it was a big mistake. They should have, you might recall, I was always waving a mask when I was on TV back then too. And mask is sort of an obvious thing. Final thought on that is the economics has a lot to offer this space, because there are a lot of things like a mask. The cost of wearing a mask is pretty low, right? The mask itself doesn't cost much. If you got a mask on, like, we're all a little bit worse off because we don't get to see the handsome Mark Zandy. But other than that, right, the mask hasn't really got much social costs, but it might have a benefit, right? And so why not? Why not? Like, so you should really. Yeah, you should really know that there's no benefit at all, like with a high degree of certainty, if you're going to not wear a mask in a circumstance like that. And it just doesn't feel like the sort of cost benefit analysis was something that the health people are trained to do and to think about things too. Like, there are all these supplements that maybe help and maybe don't, but since it's just a supplement, like, why not take some zinc?
Yeah,
now
that's
and
my
then,
wife's
right?
attitude. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't shave this morning, and I thought I'd shave when I got to the office, but my razor disappeared from my office, so my
Interesting.
My ugly mug is even uglier this morning. So.
I can't tell, actually.
You can't? Okay, very
No.
good. Good. Well, good. Well, it's really a pleasure and to have you, and thanks for joining us. And I will be the first in line to buy your book when you write it, but maybe a little bit of perspective. Okay. And we should dive right in. We got a lot of statistics to talk about. It was a big week for statistics. And
is the cowbell ready? Is that?
I see it there on Ryan's desk over there. So we'll see how it goes. So Ryan, I always begin with Ryan, Kevin, because Ryan is the maven of these statistics. And right, Cris?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Undisputed champion. Yeah.
Yeah, undisputed. So Ryan, why don't you go first?
Right,
and let me just say, this better be about the GDP report. That's all I'm saying.
All right, then you might want to start with Cris.
Okay, no, go ahead. Go ahead, fire away.
Do you want something related to GDP?
Well, no, I don't mean to mess with your numbers. So you go ahead. I actually have some pretty good GDP numbers. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, you go first.
Hey, let me go first. I have a good one for you guys.
Okay, go, Kevin.
Right.
You go first.
We'll mix it up.
Okay. So I'm going to give you three numbers.
Okay.
14%,
14%,
15.3%, and 12.4%. What are those three numbers?
Are they annualized?
And yeah.
Okay.
And they came out this week.
So they're the way you would see it at the release. They came out this week. Yeah.
One of them's intellectual property investment.
Nope.
No?
No, okay, so they came out this week. These are percentages.
14, 15.3, and 12.4.
That's interesting. And do they all come from the same release, Kevin, or are they different releases?
They come from the same release, but since you guys are floundering, I'll say that it's the last three. The current quarter and then the 2 quarters before the number in the release.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So what was 14.5? And
So
that's the most-
14, 50. So what the latest release, it was 14.
Oh,
okay. So it must be GDP, right? It's got to be GDP. Something in the GDP report, 14%.
Yeah, it is something in the GDP report.
Yeah. So it's not intellectual property because that does
That was
feel-
really strong.
Yeah, that was very strong.
Yeah, it
It
was
was around 12.
Yeah, 11-ish, I think is what I
Yeah.
remember. But yeah.
And these are all positive numbers, no negative numbers.
Yeah, it's really quite a run, right? Like you don't usually see the GDP release numbers like
Yeah.
that one after the other.
And it wasn't services spending. It wasn't that strong.
Maybe no, is something to do with imports, perhaps?
Nope, not it. Well, no.
No. Okay. All right. Fair enough. I don't know. I'm stymied. Do you guys have any clue? Any
No.
ideas? You want to ask? You want to give us one more clue without giving it away, Kevin, or is that impossible to do?
Yeah, how about this? Has anyone gone to Home Depot lately?
Oh, is it really consumption on? I don't. Do they? Oh, it's a home. It's home remodeling and renovation.
Well, it's the
Res-
deflator, the inflation rate for residential construction.
Oh,
That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Okay.
Yeah, we
And-
we
and-
All
already
right.
got
That's a
that.
good one, though.
Those 3 quarters, though, right? I mean, again, we all love to dig through the numbers, but looking at that, yeah, and so real residential investment was down 7%, but it was because of this deflator.
That is interesting. So this is the measure of inflation in the in
In
home
like
building.
lumber,
Yeah, so all the building
drywall,
materials. Yeah, exactly. Right. That's a really good one.
That is a good one.
That is a very good one, and just highlights the impact that supply chain issues are having on pricing, and I guess strong demand as well, as you point out. We're all been going to Home Depot and Lowe's a lot during the pandemic.
It was actually like there's been a lot of interesting stuff in the space that shows how economics works. So fencing is a lot more expensive. But one of the ways you can make fencing less expensive is if you like have wider boards so that it takes fewer boards, because each time you nail a board, there's like labor costs for doing that. And so if you go look, they've actually, the fence boards are wider.
No, really?
Yeah, really. Yeah. And it's because it helps reduce the costs so the soaring materials costs can be offset by lower labor costs if you make the thing easier to put up.
Makes sense.
And there's a lot of that going on if you go look. But yeah, it's my whole life I've never seen it like this with lumber and.
Although interestingly
everything
enough,
like
lumber has come in quite a bit. It peaked in May.
Sure.
I think it was at $1,600 per 1,000 board feet, and I think we're down to like $500-$600. Still high compared to pre-pandemic. So despite that, you're still seeing these big increases in building material costs. Yeah, interesting.
Yep.
Have you heard about blue paint?
I have not.
What is blue paint?
There's the blue paint crisis. Apparently, the paint manufacturers are indicating that the chemicals they need for blue paint are in short supply. They can't find them, so they're just not going to produce blue paint apparently for a while.
Wow. When I was at the Fed, paint was actually like a really interesting thing for it's like total esoterica, but that's why we're talking Moody's right now, right? But paint is one of those things that's like really costly to ship. But the raw materials, I guess, are not so hard to ship. And so that paint manufacturing is really diffused all over the place. It's kind of like the paint. If you live in Massachusetts, the paint you're going to put on your walls is probably made in Massachusetts. And so the paint manufacturers are pretty close to where they use the paint. And so paint is one of those things that's sort of regionally interesting because it's spread out everywhere. And there's sort of paint manufacturing kind of everywhere. And so if you follow the, paint manufacturers, their earnings reports and things like that, it's a kind of nice indicator that's not dependent on local conditions very much because it's everywhere.
Well, it used to be the case, and this many years ago, maybe 2-3 decades ago, the chief economist at DuPont told me that the most reliable indicator of the business cycle was this chemical that went into making white paint, because white paint was used for, appliances and cars and,
Probably
obviously-
titanium dioxide.
Oh, that was
would be
it.
my
It was
guess.
titanium
Okay.
dioxide. Exactly. Hey, Ryan, where's your bell? That is bell worthy, don't you think?
There you go.
There you
There's
go.
the bell.
You're not going to ring it then. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
You're gonna best Ryan, Kevin, at this pace. Yeah, titanium. It was the price of titanium dioxide. I kind of lost track of that. I haven't been following that since for a number of years. Okay, I'm gonna go next then, and this goes to the GDP report, and it's 3 numbers. You ready? 2%, 2 percentage points, and 2 percentage points. A lot of twos.
All right. So one of them is is one negative?
No.
right,
And
well,
one is like
inventory's
obvious. One is like the
Yeah.
obvious.
The top line number
inventories,
is
Top line.
2%.
Yeah.
GDP was up 2% in the
Yeah.
quarter.
Inventories were 2.1.
They added 2.1.
It was 2.07. I'm rounding
Yeah,
down
yeah.
to 2.
Okay. Well,
then-
see,
Okay, that was good,
You're just
though.
wrong.
Just so it catch the listener up because they're not following this at all. So there was the first 2 is GDP was bottom line up 2% annualized rate in Q3 of 2021. Obviously, it's a very soft number. We'll come back and talk about that for a second. The second 2 percentage points is the boost to GDP from inventory. So inventories in Q2 were drawn down. We added to inventories in Q3, so that swing added 2 percentage points. So which means without that swing, we would have had actually a slight negative number,
Squat.
right?
The word-
Slight
the word
negative
is
number.
squat.
Yeah, squat. Here, okay. Now here, this is where you get the cowbell if you get this one right, and I think Ryan should get this.
It's the drag from autos.
You're right. Ring the bell. Ring the bell, Ryan. There you go. That's pathetic. That bell. Come on. Is that the best
I'm
you
not
can do?
cowbell.
swinging it. I'm not because
Oh,
you're
you're at
listening.
home.
You don't want to. Yeah.
Yeah, you're at home.
I got
Okay.
a baby sleeping upstairs.
Okay. So okay, fair enough. All right. I know. Can't sacrifice the baby to inside economics. Okay, fair enough.
Absolutely not.
We got to work on that. You got to get your priorities straight over there, right? Yeah. So the second 2%, the third statistic of the 2 percentage points is the drag on GDP from the collapse in vehicle production, motor vehicle production. And obviously that was pretty significant. Again, going back to global supply chains, it's not because there's no demand for vehicles. There's a lot of demand. It's that vehicle producers just couldn't get the chips and other stuff they need to build the car. So
Yeah, you can't
that was
buy. You
pretty
can't
good
buy
one.
something you can't get.
yeah, can't buy something you can't get. Okay. All right. Very good. So GDP was soft in the quarter, and we're going to come back to that and talk a little bit about what we think that implies about the economy going forward. But before we do that, Ryan, you want to go? What's your statistic?
All right, 47.6%.
47.6.
Has nothing to do with GDP.
Has it something to do with confidence?
You're getting there.
Okay. I think I know. Is it the labor market differential in the Conference Board survey?
Good guess. It was really strong. It was 45.
45. So that is the difference between the percent of people say that jobs are easy to get, less percent that say they're hard to get. Which I think 45, isn't that like the highest in history or pretty close to the highest
Pretty
in history?
close. Mhm.
Pretty close. So that goes to what's going on in the labor market. But so okay, it's in the survey.
Right. And I
sentiment
picked
survey.
confidence because last week we talked about some economists are worried that you got confidence dropping. This is a sign of recession. But this number
Yeah.
within Conference Board
Yeah.
pushes back against that.
Right. Well, the top line Conference Board survey was like 113, so that's not it. So it's got to be something in the bowels of the Conference Board survey.
It's really in the bowels.
Okay, well, I'm gonna take a wild guess. It's the sentiment measure for people in the lowest part of the income distribution.
Chris, you got a guess?
I don't.
All right. I won't let you guys suffer.
Okay,
It's
go
the
ahead.
percent of respondents planning to take a vacation.
Oh, Okay.
All right,
So
and that
give
was
us
back to where
context. Give
it's
us
back to where it was pre-pandemic.
All right.
Okay.
But if you look within the percent that are their travels domestic, so the U.S. is already back up to where it was pre-pandemic, and that was really, really strong. So if people are really worried about a recession or their jobs, they're not planning vacations.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And what was the low if you go back into the teeth of the pandemic? Do you recall?
Low 30s, 30%.
Low 30s. Is that about as low as it gets? Low 30s?
Yeah.
Probably. Okay. All right. Well, that's a good one. Yeah, you're right, because there was a lot of voices, or at least a few voices, or maybe just one voice that I heard a lot saying recession, and that was because they were pointing to the collapse in confidence in the both the University of Michigan and the Conference Board survey.
But that was all Delta related.
The sentiment, decline in sentiment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was that Blanchflower paper at NPR.
Blanchflower.
Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I got a call from a New York Post reporter, and she brought that up, and my immediate reaction was no way. And that's, of course, the quote she put into the paper. And then Blanchflower started tweeting, things that I won't repeat.
This is why you shouldn't be on Twitter.
I know, but I find it so intoxicating. Yeah, it's a very intoxicating thing.
That's
I
the
can see
trap.
you going down rabbit holes.
So at one point I set up a Twitter account, but I've never tweeted once in my life. But for some reason I haven't even checked, but last I checked I had a few hundred followers, and I just love those people. Like I picture them every morning. Is today the day? It's today.
Well, Kevin, I did the same thing as you. 10 years ago, I got my handle, and I hadn't used it for 10 years. And then 2 weeks ago, I said, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. And I've been doing it for 2 weeks now. And I find it interesting. I mean, you have to manage, I think, excuse me. I apologize for that. You have to manage time wisely, because you can get really sucked down into it. But I find it quite interesting.
Chris, are you on Twitter?
I am on Twitter. Yeah.
No, Chris.
Chris.
Wait a second. Before Chris says that, this is a good time for me to advertise. At Mark Zandy. There you go. That's my Twitter handle. Go ahead, Chris. Are you on Twitter?
I do have a handle, but I never use it. So
You're a LinkedIn guy. You're all over LinkedIn.
I'm all over LinkedIn. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not on LinkedIn. Yeah.
You got to choose one.
Kevin, are you on LinkedIn?
No.
No, yeah.
No.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right, Chris, you're up.
Sorry. On the number thing, I have another one that I think is really like the most, if we're about to segue into talking about the economy, it's like the most interesting number to me out there is 62% right now. 62%. And it's it's pretty wild that it's 62%.
Really? I don't know.
Just because we're going slow, I'll just tell you.
Yeah.
So it's in the NFIB survey.
Oh, is that the net percent having difficulty hiring a position?
Yeah, it's people who say that they are can't find anyone or having difficulty. And it's about half and half. But it's amazing how hard it is for people to find labor right now. Oh
yeah. Chris, did you have a statistic you want to do quickly?
Sure, I have a quick one. 0.8%.
And it's not housing related.
It's not housing related.
Oh, for one.
Oh yeah.
Did it come out today?
It did not come out today. It came out this week.
It's the latest price for titanium dioxide.
Yeah.
I think that's up 300%.
Daily increase. The daily increase. I don't know, Chris. Fire away. What is it?
All right. So it was a little bit of a trick question. There were actually 2.8% that came out this week. But the one I was focused on is core capital goods increase.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yep.
Yeah.
So non-defense
it's a good one when
capital.
Chris suggests it, but when I use it, it's a terrible one to use.
There's some truth to that. I apologize, Ryan. You're right. You're right. I criticized you for using that.
He's grading on a scale.
Yeah.
I got a lower bar, Ryan.
So tell us about that statistic, the 0.8.
Yeah. So the 0.8 is up. It indicates strength, and it shows that businesses are investing in equipment, and this should pay off in terms of additional productivity later on. And I also think it demonstrates that businesses are not just sitting on their hands with the supply chain issues. They're investing. They're going to figure this thing out, and therefore the inflationary pressure should subside over the next few quarters. So I viewed it as an optimistic statistic. It's at an all-time high here.
Yeah, investment remains very strong, quite strong. Yeah. Hey, Kevin, you said to me, I think it was in an email earlier this week, that if GDP in Q3 came in negative, you thought there's a high probability we'd go into recession. It wasn't quite negative, although, you know, pretty
It's all
damn close.
inventories.
Yeah, it was all
Yeah,
inventory.
because GDP now is down to 0.2% right before the release, and that's pretty uncomfortably close to negative. And of course, the way the media covers recessions is 2 negative quarters, right? Like, so you could talk about all the indicators the NBER has, but I'm pretty wary about the fourth quarter because of the supply chain issues. You know, there are a lot of seasonals that are expecting big moves that aren't going to happen. And so I think it's kind of unlikely that Q4 is going to be above Q3. And now, given the big inventory build, you know, that's probably going to be a reverse, right? Probably inventory is usually, it's negatively correlated. So maybe it takes 0.5% or 1% off the fourth quarter. So you're probably looking at a negative fourth quarter is more likely than it was the day before the GDP release.
Really?
And if it
Oh,
had been negative, I think you'd have had the 2 negative quarters. And so the NBR may or may not have decided that that was a recession if you had 2 tiny little negative quarters after, like, you know, those huge 6% quarters. But the media would have said recession for sure, right? Once they saw the second negative quarter.
Ryan, do you have any views on the seasonals? Do you think they are going to play a role here in Q4?
Yeah, and the seasonals for business investment and inventories aren't very favorable, but, you know, consumer spending is going to be pretty strong in the
I
fourth
would
quarter.
think. Yeah.
Particularly since we're going to pull forward some of the holiday shopping into October, November. December's going to be a dud, but that alone should keep us north of zero.
I mean, you got personal consumption spending today, and it was pretty strong, and that was on top of a very strong number for August. So you're
And
coming
October
into
looks really strong.
And October looks so. Kevin, you're coming into the quarter with a lot of consumer spending, so it could be offset by inventory and maybe in trade. I'm not sure you're going to see the same kind of drag. That was a pretty big drag from trade. It related to the inventories, right? You imported all this stuff,
Sure.
and you know, if you're going to see some unwinding of inventory, you might see some unwinding of the trade deficit. So I think it's going to be pretty tough to get a weaker number in Q4.
Well, the thing is too that we have to see what happens to prices, and the link between like nominal and real is really uncertain now in a way it hasn't been, you know, since you and I were kids practically, right?
Yeah.
And so when you see like a really strong M3 durable goods number, you know, it may or may not be as strong as you think because the prices are like, again, like what we said about the price of residential construction. You know, that little pockets like that are going to take things you thought like, and you see that with disposable personal income, right?
Yeah.
I mean, real disposable personal income took a pretty big fall.
And that, of course, the transfer, that was a lot of that reflected the loss of the supplemental UI in September. So you saw this big drive. Hey, the one thing I did see that I was encouraged by, and I'm just asking if I should be, the core consumer expenditure deflator. That's the key indicator that the Fed uses for kind of gauging inflation.
Yeah.
That was only up 0.2% in the month. So you annualize that, and that's, you know, 2.4% roughly. So kind of where the Fed would want it. Was there something going on there that's one off, or does that reflect a moderation in inflationary pressures? That's at face value. That's what it's saying. Is that
It's temporary.
it is
If you
temporary?
look at used car prices, the next couple months are going to be nasty.
So you think we're going to get or is this going to come right back up?
Yeah, and the house prices are starting to bleed in the core CPI.
Yeah,
so
the house prices are going to be the whole thing. Ryan's exactly right because those haven't budged yet. But like if you look at Case-Shiller and everything and the residential construction costs, you know, house prices should be going up, you know, 5-6% annual rate. But they've been 2% in the GDP release.
The one interesting thing there is, though, in the PCE, the rent is just a much smaller percentage of the total index. I mean, that's going to matter for CPI for sure, but much less so for PCE. But nonetheless, yeah, okay. So I shouldn't read too much into the pretty sanguine inflation number that we got for the month. It must indicate that things are I mean, if you go back and look at the monthly increase in core consumer expenditure deflator, peaked back in the summer, like April, May, June, in that period, and it is moderating, but you're saying it's not moderating.
You're right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we're not going to get, you know, usually you could forecast the core PC deflator. In normal times of a ruler, it's going to be 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. But that's not going to last, in the next few months. We won't get back to what we saw earlier this year, but we'll get an acceleration.
Okay, let's end this part of the conversation with just, and you don't have to play if you don't want to. What probability do you put on a negative GDP print in the fourth quarter, Ryan?
10%.
10. Chris?
10%.
God, Chris always
Here we go
does
again.
that.
No, that was my number.
I thought Chris was going to go 50.
Yeah, right. Kevin, what do you say?
Oh yeah, it's 60%.
Really, 60%?
Wow.
Isn't that
Okay.
interesting?
Yeah. I mean, look at
yeah.
the evolution of the GDP now for Q3,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so everybody started the quarter thinking it was a 7% quarter,
Yeah.
right? And by the end, it was down to 0.2 just because of the successive revisions and the inflation. So I think that nominal GDP, you and I probably we'll probably all agree on nominal GDP, but I think that there's going to be so
Really?
much in prices that you could have.
The Atlanta Fed measure they do a very good job, but they also include some survey-based measures of economic activity. That doesn't necessarily feed into GDP, and I think that's one reason they had a pretty big miss, compared to what GDP actually did.
Just for the listener, the Atlanta Fed puts out a tracker based on the data that's coming out every day and translating that into GDP for the quarter. We do the same thing, but that's what Ryan means by the Atlanta Fed. So 60%, interesting. I'm gonna really blow your mind.
Here we go.
Zero probability. It's not happening.
You're going to go 50.
Not happening. Not happening. It's not happening unless the virus comes back. But I don't think that's going to happen.
That's the key. Yeah.
That's the key.
Correct.
But it's not going to happen that fast under any scenario.
But also, even with the virus, right, because vaccinations have spread so much, I know there's still more people who should get vaccinated, that it's different now, right? Like the case fatality rate has gone way, way down. And so I think that even if the virus, like there's this new AY 4.2 variant that people are concerned about, that if that did take off, I still think that as long as the case fatality rate stayed low, that people continue to go to work and stuff, right? I mean, it's not going to be a shutdown.
They didn't do it with Delta, though. Delta did have an impact. Yeah, if you look at these. Yeah.
But yeah, that's right. The first time through, but the percentage of people vaccinated is way higher now than it was like in June.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think each successive wave, unless the virus really goes off the rails here, is going to be less disruptive than the previous one. So it should be less disruptive.
Yeah. There was a really interesting Lancet article, by the way, on that, which is just that it's the people who had COVID and have been vaccinated have a kind of super immunity.
I've heard that.
Really,
yeah. I saw that. Yeah.
So I think that they're, anyway.
Yeah. Hey,
And
let's
one last thing for Q4 GDP,
sure.
why it's unlikely going to decline, is that the inventories in Q3 still fell. They just fell less than they did in the prior quarter, and just the way they calculate GDP is the change in the change.
Exactly.
So even if we get flat inventories, or we have to get a build at some point, that's going to really juice GDP.
Because the stock is so low. The stock of inventory is so low. Yeah.
Inventory
that makes
ratios
sense in the
really,
context
really low.
of supply. Supply chain issues. Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, let's turn to the topic at hand, top of mind, and that's seems like this has been a topic for quite some time, the Build Back Better agenda, the proposal that President Biden put forward a few months ago, kind of making its way through Congress now. Feels like it's coming pretty close to the finish line, meaning getting passed into law, although, that's still not a done deal. We'll have to see. Right now, the legislation the proposal is sitting around $1.75 trillion over 10 years in spending on various types of social programs, healthcare, housing, childcare, climate change, just a range of things. And there are pay-fors in the proposal that at least the White House is scoring at something closer to $1.9 trillion. That's, I think the biggest pay-for is more enforcement by the IRS to raise more revenue. There's some tax law changes on taxing foreign income for corporations, global minimum tax. I also noticed, and I'm really curious, Kevin, in your view on this, on the stock repurchases. There's a tax on repurchase of stock now. That's the first time I've seen that kind of snake in. And all of that's over a 10-year period. So a lot to digest there. But Kevin, really interested in your broad sense of this. And I guess if I had to ask you a very specific question, because I know where you're coming from, let me begin by saying, what is there anything in this that you like? If you were king for the day, that you would, say, okay, I think that's okay. And then maybe to bookend it, what is it you really don't like in the proposal? But kind of open
I
ended.
guess
I'll let you go anywhere you want to go.
yeah, thanks, Mark. I think that this is, I'll have to, like two things after I say the next thing. But one of the things I like is that the sort of huge increases in marginal tax rates across the board on corporations and individuals that were like originally contemplated by President Biden have pretty much the probabilities of those going through have gone to zero because Sinema and Manchin say they won't vote for tax increases like that. And I think that like the original corporate proposal, it's something that a lot of people didn't really understand, but like in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, our corporate side cost almost nothing. I'm not saying cost nothing in a Jen Psaki kind of way. I'm saying cost nothing in a joint tax committee kind of way. The international tax, like this guilty and beat stuff that we added so that there's more tax on your foreign earnings, that just about offset the lower rate. And so that the JCT score for the corporate side of our proposal was just 300 billion in loss if you combine the international and the tax rate effect. And so the original proposal was raising, like what, 1.9 billion just on corporates. I mean, trillion on corporates over 10. And so what that means is that relative to President Obama's corporate tax code, what President Biden was proposing was keeping all the base broadeners that we put in and then jacking the rate back up, right? Which is one of the reasons why Milton Friedman was kind of opposed to tax reform by the way. He said, oh, you're going to get a broad base and then they're going to lift the rate back up in the future. So it's exactly what they were doing. And so relative to Obama's code, it was a huge tax increase, corporate tax increase, would have made us like by far the least competitive place on it. So I really like the fact that like people sort of came to their senses about that one, because I think that would have really done quite a bit of harm. I think that in the spending, I guess the subsidies for green things, I've written a lot. Gabe Metcalf and I have a number of papers on how subsidies for green things, tend to work. And if you're an economist, then you think that if you believe in Pigovian taxation, what we call it, right? Like, so if there's something that's cleaner than something else, then subsidizing that isn't bad economics at all. And so, I guess that if I had to pick something that at least has makes some economic sense, it would be that. The thing that sort of disturbs me is that there are a lot of really cockamamie ideas floating around, or things that I view as like potentially like really long run harmful because of the precedents they set. And you mentioned a few, like so cockamamie idea number one is they have an alternative minimum tax on book income. And no kidding, Mark, in the 80s, I wrote a paper about this with Trevor Harris, an accounting professor at Columbia University. But the basic idea is that, tax books and accounting books are designed for different purposes. Tax books are designed for enforcement, accounting books for information revelation. And then if you combine the two, if you make the tax connected to things in the accounting statement, then you get all sorts of weird, strange behaviors. And in the paper that I wrote back in the day, because they were using the accounting books for tax purposes in some countries, we found things like corporations were inflating their earnings by not claiming investment tax credits. Right, like so you just create like this, and so Europeans used to do something like this alternative book tax, and they all stopped it because it created such weird incentives. So that's like a cockamamie idea. I think the excise tax on stock buybacks right now, like the dividend tax is higher. It's going to be certainly if proposals go through, potentially higher still. But what people do is they repurchase shares instead of paying dividends in order to take advantage of the lower capital gains rate. And if you want to level the playing field, maybe you could argue that an excise tax on stocks buybacks is making it so that there's not like a favored treatment of one type of given cash to shareholders over another It's probably not like the end of the world, a 2% excise tax on stock buybacks. It's not
Oh,
something
interesting.
I propose. But what companies would just do is they would retain their earnings until a Republican comes in and takes it away, right? And then they would start buying back shares again. There is a little bit of evidence, but it's pretty old. But like Fazari, Hubbard, and Peterson have a famous paper that when firms retain more earnings, that they invest more. And I think that that's kind of like the motivation that people have. But Auerbach and I have a paper in the Journal of Public Economics that I think shows that that doesn't really work. Like the firms that would be repurchasing shares, their investment isn't going to, like, think about it like Apple. Apple's investment in the U.S. isn't going to be affected if we penalize their repurchases, right? And so the mark-to-market tax on billionaires, it's about 107 pages, the proposal, and I actually read the whole thing. Because I'm a tax geek, it's what tax geeks do.
You mean the
for a
Wyden
living.
proposal that they were debating?
The Wyden proposal,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the thing is that one is the thing that's disturbing about it to me is that so first what they're doing is they're basically saying when you have a capital gain, then you should call that income, and in a Haig-Simon sense, we all learned in graduate school that it is kind of income, your change in wealth, right? And so it's income in the year that you earn it, and so you have to pay tax on it. So like if the S&P 500 goes up 10% this year, then you owe tax on that. If it goes down 10%, then you can refund previous taxes and so on. And so that kind of taxing on accrual, Auerbach has a famous AER, American Economic Review paper on that, on how to do it so that it's basically you tax at the end retrospectively, but you sort of level the playing field between accruals and other types of income. And so the accrual part is something that's like exists in the literature, but the thing that's really, I think, positively creepy about the proposal is that the first year you qualify, which could happen, and you might even qualify, Mark, as successful as you guys are, but if you have 3 years in a row of $100 million.
Cris, I should say, Kevin, Cris is the crypto king. So if anyone's going to qualify, it'd be
so if
Cris.
you have 3 years in a row of $100 million in pre-tax income, then you're a billionaire. Given that 50% of it's taken by the government, that really means that if your after-tax income is 150 million in 3 years, then they're calling you a billionaire, right?
Yeah.
But the point is that when that happens, do you know what they do? They tax all your previous gains at the capital gains rate, and so that the sort of accrual taxation that happens rolling forward is after basically a 28% wealth tax. Which would be the highest wealth tax in the history of the world. And now I think that's one reason why moderate Democrats have sort of decided they're not interested in
I think
this proposal. But because Sinema and Manchin have decided that they won't endorse like actual sort of statutory rate increases, then they're feeling around for weird tricks to raise revenue. And that kind of stuff doesn't usually end well. And the final thought is this, paying lots of auditors and everything to close the tax gap.
Yeah.
The tax gap is something that every presidential campaign that I've ever seen, like going all the way back to 2000, Democrat or Republican, they always like pay for what they're doing by closing the tax gap. Because the tax gap is basically, like there's probably, like right now, I don't know what the current estimate is, maybe you do, Mark, but there's about $1 trillion or $2 trillion in taxes that are owed by people that aren't paid. And there's an estimate of that that's put out, I guess, by joint tax every year.
Yeah.
And so the tax gap is out there. It's like, let's just say it's $1 trillion. And every campaign says, well, I'm going to increase enforcement and close the tax gap by 500 billion. And then I'm going to spend the 500 billion on getting a dog for everybody because dogs are so wonderful. So the point is just that the tax gap is kind of like the rogue's way to pay for things because it never gets closed. And this idea that if we take this thing that's impossible to close and then stick a bunch of low skill, low paid IRS employees on the problem, like they're not going to close it. You're not going to get that revenue, whatever the Joint Tax Committee says. The tax gap.
I guess, although on that one, I guess it depends on what CB or against the Joint Committee on Tax scores it at. I guess, right? I mean,
no, I think in the end though, it depends on what happens. So maybe it'll help them pass it because the JCT
I see.
says, it's going to be effective. The reality is you're not going to.
Yeah. Interesting. So it sounds like, just listening to that on the tax side of this, you're least concerned about the stock repurchase, the tax on stock repurchases or buybacks.
Right, and I didn't get to the
Interesting.
thing that I didn't get to the thing I'm most disturbed about, which I think is
Okay.
really going to happen, which is
Yeah.
the surtax on high incomes.
You don't like that.
Well, yeah, because this so it's a 5% surtax on modified adjusted gross income above 10 million, 8% surtax on modified gross income over 25 million, and so that brings the top ordinary income tax rate to 48.8% in 2022, 51.4% in 2025 when the 37% rate expires. It makes the U.S. have the highest marginal tax rate of any OECD country. And sure, maybe you don't care if Michael Jordan or LeBron James is paying
It shows
marginal
your
tax
age,
rate
by the
like
way,
that.
Kevin, that you go
Yeah,
to
I know.
Michael
Or Larry
Jordan.
Bird, yeah.
Right, Larry Bird.
But
I'd go to Michael
but
Jordan too, by the way. Yeah.
yeah. But Michael Jordan's still probably making 10 million a year. Is all I'm saying. But
That's true.
the point is just that there are a lot of small businesses in that category that employ a lot of people, and so it's a very big tax increase on businesses in the U.S. Probably about half the people in that category are businesses, I would say.
So,
Past their entities.
so I mean, is there any tax that you would be in favor of to generate revenue to pay for expanded government services, or even just to close deficits and debt, for that matter?
Yeah, sure. I was a big proponent of the border adjusted business cash flow tax. It's basically that plus a payroll tax is sort of like a value added tax, which is a super efficient way to raise revenue. It's pretty much what everybody else does. So if you look at tax history around the world, countries all around the world have started to take inefficient income taxes and replace them with super efficient consumption taxes. They don't even have to be, as David Bradford taught us, they don't even have to be regressive, because you can combine other transfers with the consumption taxes so that it works out for low income people or low consumption people. And so I think that if we took the corporate tax and basically modified it so that it was border adjusted business cash flow tax, as we proposed, or that before I went into the White House, as was proposed by Kevin Brady, then you've basically taken the corporate tax and turned it into a value added tax, and then at that point the distortion from it is much different from the current structure. So if I absolutely had to have revenue, that's how I do it.
Just one other tax I wanted to ask about is the carbon tax. Well, how do you feel about that, carbon taxation?
Yeah, carbon taxation. I've written a lot about this. That if you take the carbon tax revenue, the carbon tax is kind of like a value-added tax, and it's sort of hitting a little bit of everything because there's embodied energy in just about everything. And so if you took the carbon tax and then used that revenue to reduce more distortive marginal tax rates, then if you look at the academic literature, there are people who show that you can actually make GDP go up, irrespective of any climate benefit, right? Because the carbon tax is relatively efficient. And so if you take the inefficient taxes and reduce them with the carbon tax revenue, then you can come up with a trade that makes sense. And I think it's sort of a metric of how broken politics is that that hasn't happened, right? So let's just say that the Democratic Party is super concerned about climate change, and the Republican Party is less concerned. I don't think that that's a terrible characterization. It's probably pretty close.
Yep.
And so, but if you really, believe Greta and you think that it's like an existential threat to the world and we got to do something about it, then if you're a Democrat, you basically say, okay, $60 a ton carbon tax, go to Mitch McConnell, you let me have the carbon tax, I'll let you have the revenue. You cut whatever taxes you want. And if they did that, then GDP would go up. It'd be good for the economy and it'd be good for the climate. But the fact that we can't make that trade, so that when Democrats are proposing policy in this space, they always want to take the money and spend it on their pet projects, right? So they're not ever dickering with Republicans over it. And I think that if I thought that there was an asteroid coming to hit the planet and you thought that there isn't, but I was really sure the asteroid's going to hit the planet, then I'd give you whatever you want for me to like send Bruce Willis up there to blow up the asteroid, right? and the fact that they're not doing that on climate change suggests to me that the Democrats aren't serious about it.
Or they're trying everything they can, given the politics of the carbon tax, right? I mean, I think that's where I actually think that's where we ultimately land. I mean,
because it's a big tax increase on coal.
Yeah,
as an example.
Exactly.
Kim Metcalf and I in the early 90s did some input-output analysis. Is probably somebody else's updated, but a $25 a ton carbon tax just increased the price of gasoline and home heating oil by about 11%, but it increased the price of coal by 85%.
Yeah.
Right. And so basically, a carbon tax is a tax on coal. I mean,
it goes away, actually. I mean, pretty quickly.
Coal.
Kind of carbon
it's
tax.
A huge tax on coal.
Makes it very different. Well, of course, that's where all the CO2, a lot of the CO2 is coming from. There's one thing I wanted to ask you on tax policy. I've been dying to ask you because you were instrumental. I don't know if this is an exaggeration, but you were the architect or an architect of the Trump tax cuts. And, there's a lot of debate, at least in the circles that I'm in and the research that I'm reading, about whether those tax cuts had any kind of benefit, except for the near-term kind of demand side, cut a check to corporations, they, spend some of it, get some juice. Is there any long-term benefit? And you saw the IMF paper, Brookings came out with some work kind of saying, no, we can't see it. There's no benefit.
Yeah,
how do you respond to that?
There's some pretty tendentious stuff that's not very academically sensible. I don't know if I've read the IMF thing. They're usually pretty good. They have a good tax team, but you might recall that Glenn Hubbard and Jason Cummins and I had a paper that looked at the 86 Tax Act that was published in Brookings, and it's probably been cited 1,000 times as one of the early papers that used a natural experiment to identify the impact of tax policy on capital investment. And what Glenn and I have done with, my person who worked with me at CEA, Tyler Goodspeed, is we've basically taken everything that we did for the 86 Tax Act and applied it to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And we're just finishing that paper up right now, but we're finding actually pretty much similar estimates to what we got with the 86 Tax Act. So there was a big positive effect on capital spending that was, again, the identification strategy that we used back then, which we haven't changed at all, so you couldn't argue that we're data mining in any way. We're just using
just for the listener, the identification strategy, meaning kind of there's all these moving parts, and you're trying to tease out the
tax effect.
Yeah,
right. And so what we did back then is so the problem with finding tax policy effects is that Congress tends to have an investment tax credit in a recession, and then take it off when you're out of a recession. And so if you're looking over time, then it looks like investment tax credits make investment go down, because investment tax credits tend to happen when investment's low because the policy is endogenous. And so making it so that you can control for that is the whole challenge. And I think the first paper in the literature that did that effectively and solved the problem, Auerbach and I actually wrote it. And then a year or two later, Glenn Hubbard and I did a follow-on to that paper. But it was basically had a simple identifying thought, which is that Congress is, let's just say, too stupid to because there are lots of different types of assets. There's cars, there's computers, there's trucks, there's blast furnaces, so stuff like that. And Congress is too stupid to jigger the cross-section variation in the tax rate on computers versus cars when they have a big tax reform or investment tax credit. But depending on the asset life, if you have something that appreciates quickly or over a long, long time, then a tax change will have different effects on the incentive to buy a computer or a car or anything like that. And so taking the BA has really, really broad asset detail. It's now up to almost 200 assets, and then estimating the change in or tax policy's likely effect on that asset. Then you end up with a prediction of what happens to 200 different assets, whether they went up by a lot or a little after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and you can estimate the tax policy effect looking at how all those things vary. And when you do that, we're getting really big effects of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Yeah, it's really obviously in the data, just like it was in the Brookings paper that we wrote a while ago. The people who are saying that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act had no effect, there are a lot of people who have said it that are partisans, not like smart economists like you guys. But there's a common mistake that I see people make, and it's basically that first of all, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed in December, right? And then it was effective, or maybe it was even early January, it was effective in January. But what it was being debated, the expensing part,
2018, right? It was January
yeah,
2018.
2017, or January 2018, or December 2017.
Yeah, right.
So this is actually something that I insisted on while we were doing it. But if you basically say we're going to have expensing, which means that if you buy a machine that's got really favorable tax treatment, then the whole time that you're debating that, then if people wonder whether that's going to happen, suppose they really think in September that by next January there's going to be expensing. Well, then what you might do is not buy any capital in the fourth quarter, because the tax treatment is so wonderful if you can make it to the first quarter. And you don't want to create a crater as you're having a tax policy debate. And so what we did is that when we started the tax policy debate, we said that expensing will be retroactive to today. Like the day we're starting the debate, like September or something like that. So that we'll give you that favorable treatment if we pass it. And so that way you don't get the crater. But in this case, the tax rate went from 35% to 21%. And so as it became obvious that the tax change was going to happen, then firms saw that if they timed the investment into the fourth quarter of 2017, then they would subtract $1 and then get a 35-cent benefit because they'd save a 35% tax rate. Whereas if they in January subtracted the $1, they'd get a 21-cent tax benefit.
Oh, I see.
And so they piled up the investment in the fourth quarter as much as they could. And so you got this really, really big spike in investment in the fourth quarter. And what a lot of people do who say that, oh, we didn't get the spike that they expected, is that they don't attribute the fourth quarter increase to the tax cuts, but they should. And the other thing is that the investment, the other conceptual error people make is that what a tax policy does is it sets the level of investment. And so if you're in an equilibrium, say, then people are investing just enough to replace depreciation, just say. And then all of a sudden you have a tax cut, and so that people want to invest 10% more. So when they invest 10% more, the level of investment goes up by 10%. Now investment is more than depreciation. So the capital stock is growing, the economy is growing. And if investment stays at that higher level, then you're going to continue to grow until the capital stock is so much bigger that depreciation and investment are equal again. And so the idea is that once the investment level jumps, then in the models that we use to model what happens after the tax cuts, that it doesn't jump again. You're not looking for accelerating investment growth. Once you get the investment level high relative to depreciation, then you get the capital stock growth you need to drive wages and economic growth. And so, the investment to capital ratio jumped a lot and then stayed there. But like in the second year after the tax cuts, investment growth was kind of squat, right? But it was at a high level. And so the capital stock growth was actually there. And so yeah, I think the tax cuts worked. And as you recall that we said like $4,000 it was going to be like the wage increase for the typical family, and it ended up being about $6,000, after having like 8 years under President Obama of not really growing at all. And so I think that the stuff that we said was going to happen up until like January before COVID happened just about the way that I expected. And again, maybe I'll come back on the podcast a few months from now, but Glenn and I are about
You're going
to
to produce that paper. That'd be very interesting to see.
We're about done with all the tables, so it'd be out now if I wasn't basically behind and making my co-authors angry at me.
You should come back on the advanced estimate of Q4 GDP.
Oh yeah.
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah, we'll have you if you're game. That'd be great. Hey, I know we've taken a lot of your time, and thank you for that. Just one last topic to hit on is deficits and debt. There's obviously been a lot of debate around how big a deal it is that we are running deficits and debt, higher debt loads. How big a deal is it in your mind? I mean, can we run these larger deficits? And what are the constraints on that? You know, what are you looking for to say, hey, this is becoming a real problem?
Yeah, I think that first of all, the deficits have skyrocketed because of COVID, and that it happened. So I mean, some people are saying, oh, it's all President Biden's fault. That, as you know, like he added maybe 25% at the end, right, compared to all the stuff that came in during COVID. And so that we are looking at really high levels that are a problem. And
Mhm.
the bottom line is that if you spend a dollar, then eventually somebody has to be taxed to pay it, right? And even if you don't pay it back, then you at least have to pay the interest on the dollar. And so in present value, you got to tax the guy to pay the interest on the dollar. It's sort of the same whether you pay it back or not, right? Like somebody's got to pay the tax if you spend a dollar. And the literature is clear that the marginal cost of a dollar of tax revenue is about $1.50. We had a big report on this in the economic report of the president when I was CEA chair. And so all that extra spending, the trillions and trillions of extra spending, has accumulated debt that's got to be paid back with taxes. And the cost of that is about 50% of the increase in spending in deadweight loss that we'll have from the higher taxation in the future. And so, yeah, there's going to be a big price to pay. But I think that if we hadn't done PPP and all the other things that we did, I for one was very much in favor of the expanded UI benefit, because for most of the COVID year 2020, people weren't allowed to go to work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so like, how is that going to affect, so I think by the end, maybe the benefits are having an effect on the unemployment rate. But I think that getting people money to bridge them to the other side of the, worst pandemic recession in US history made sense. But the cost of it is going to be severe. There's going to be, trillions and trillions in deadweight loss from the higher taxes that we're going to have to pay in future years to pay for it.
I guess the issue is, as long as interest rates remain as low as they are, it's pretty hard to connect the dots in the minds of people that deficit and debt really matter, right? So, what do you show to the electorate that this is why we need to do this? So,
well, I think that it's not just the interest rate, but it's just the money that you owe, right? So,
but the debt service
owe,
is so low. If you get, like right now, the debt service is 1.5% of GDP, about as low as it ever.
If you could issue a console at a 0% interest rate, then you wouldn't have to worry about it, right? But I have a hard time thinking that that's going to be a market equilibrium. In the end.
So what you're saying is rates will rise at some point, and
Rates,
at that point, that'll be.
Yeah, and then with inflation in the sort of 5% range,
Yeah.
the natural time in the cycle when that would happen would be right about now, right?
Although, market expectations are for inflation to be very low, right? They're
they're going up, the expectations, right? They've been ratcheting up.
No, I don't know. Ron, have they been? No,
Yeah.
They've risen recently along with oil prices, but the five-year forwards are just around their historical
around 2.5, I think.
Yep.
So,
And when you adjust that for the CPI, it's, it runs a little bit ahead of the PCE deflator.
yeah.
Expectations are right where the Fed would want them to be.
Yeah. But anyway, I guess that's it's going to take is for inflation, interest rates to really rise in a sustained way for
right. But there's this other thing which you might recall, like some debates I had like around 2000 with Peter Orszag and Bill Gale. But there was it's like a consensus amongst, say, Democrat or left-leaning economists that deficits had a huge effect on interest rates. So therefore, like the Bush tax cuts were going to kill the economy because of the interest rate response. You might remember that.
Yeah.
I did a bunch of work with Charlie Calamaris on that topic, and very much convinced myself back in 2000 that the link between deficits and interest rates is almost not there. And part of the reason is that the interest rate that the U.S. pays is set in a global market. And at the margin, a little bit of deficit that we have more or less this year is going to be low relative to the global stock of debt, right? It's sort of like the impact of U.S. oil production on the global price of oil. It's going to be hard to get it to be a really big number, right? Because we have a relatively small share of global oil production. Well, the same is true for debt. Yeah, we have probably a bigger now share of global debt.
I think it's a little bigger now.
But, yeah, but
20,
still, it's
28 trillion, I think, out of
Yeah,
Well,
so
whatever.
interest rates are kind of set in
Yeah,
the global
yeah,
market is the point.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
so, but in the end, it's the fact that you have to pay it back.
Well, speaking of debates, we had a great debate, I thought, and thank you for
Oh, yeah.
inviting me.
Thanks.
We
That
were
was lots
down
of
in
fun.
Dallas. I think it was a couple months ago now, and we debated ESG. And if folks are interested, you should Google that. Do
Yeah, the debate is
Hassett.
online. National
Yeah, it's a
Review.
great
Yeah.
debate. Hassett, well, I enjoyed it
I had
tremendously.
a lot of fun. Yeah.
I had a lot of fun. It's about ESG investing, and I think the premise, or the proposition, I should say, was ESG investing was it undermine the American economy or
Something about like that,
something
yeah.
along that? And you
Yeah,
were
yeah.
defending the proposition. And of course, I was taking the other side of the proposition that it would
Right.
not.
And I had a very friendly audience because we were in Texas, right? And so there was nobody in the audience
friendly.
that ex ante. Yeah, there was nobody in the audience that ex ante wanted to side with you, right? You probably changed the minds, but
Although
you
they were so
you were in
gracious.
an unfriendly crowd. Yeah.
They were so gracious, though. I mean, I really, really enjoyed it, and I want to thank you for inviting me. But that's a topic we should tackle at Inside Economics, is ESG investing, because obviously Moody's is very, as you know, that's why you probably invited me.
Yeah,
is very
sure.
involved in ESG investment, so a very important thing. But I do want to thank you, Kevin, really
Thanks.
for
Great to be
coming
here.
on, and really appreciate your perspective and the time you spent with us. And just to remind everyone, please, if we're looking for future topics that you're interested in, so go to economy.com. There's a button there for Inside Economics, and let us know, what topic you're interested in, and of course we'll listen to that. And Ryan, Cris, anything else you want to say? Did I miss anything? Should I be telling the listener any? Oh, we want you to go rate us, on Apple or Spotify. Let us know. Give us a rating. We appreciate that. Anything else, guys? No.
What's
I'd
your
Okay.
like to
ahead.
endorse the Hassett Dog for Everyone proposal.
Second.
have
I'm bored of
I
that.
second it.
I have three.
Oh, well, do you get to choose the dog you, or is it determined
I
for
don't
you?
know.
Okay.
You should probably let me choose. You should let me choose for you. Like, I'm a big government guy.
Okay, there you
Got to
go.
pass the bill first, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's pass the bill first. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Till next week. Take care now.